You ready?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bijan Ahmadi. I'm the president of the Iranian Canadian Congress. Today I'm joined with my colleague, Pouyan Tabasinejad. He's ICC's, the Iranian Canadian Congress policy chair. First, I'll go through a statement from our organization, and then after I'll invite Member of Parliament Majid Jowhari to say a few words, and then we'll take any questions. Last week, on the 4-year anniversary of Canada's decision to cut diplomatic ties with Iran, on behalf of the Iranian Canadian Congress, I've submitted a formal electronic petition to the House of Commons asking the Government of Canada to re-establish diplomatic relations with Iran and facilitate the reopening of the embassies in Tehran and Ottawa. On September 7, 2012, the former Government of Canada, under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, broke diplomatic relations with Iran, closed the Canadian embassy in Tehran, and expelled all Iranian diplomats from Ottawa. After 4 years, it is now evident that this policy to sever diplomatic relations with Iran has failed, not bringing any meaningful results in advancing the interests of Canada in the Middle East, while constituting a considerable burden for the Iranian Canadian community. Over the past 4 years, Iranian Canadians, a population estimated at over 300,000 across Canada, have suffered disproportionately as a result of this suspension of diplomatic relations. In 2012, Iranian Canadians suddenly found themselves unable to access consular services that used to be provided by the Iranian embassy in Ottawa, such as power of attorney, passport renewal, and the acquiring of birth and death certificates. And were faced with considerable difficulty when attempting to acquire visitor visas for their relatives still living in Iran. Most importantly, the absence of a Canadian diplomatic presence in Iran has left Canadians visiting Iran vulnerable and without access to consular services in times of need. Today marks the 100th day of Professor Homa Houtvar's arrest in Iran, a Canadian citizen and university professor who was arrested by Iranian authorities back in June. Saeed Malikpour, a Canadian permanent resident, has been in prison in Iran for the past 8 years. As has been repeatedly highlighted by Global Affairs Canada in recent months, Canada's absence in Iran has limited its ability to communicate with Iranian authorities and advocate for the release of Professor Homa Houtvar and Saeed Malikpour. Diplomatic rapprochement at this point will not only assure that Canada stands in solidarity with its allies, many of whom have already started re-engaging with Iran after the signing of the International Nuclear Agreement last year, but also will strengthen Canada's historical role of advancing peace and protecting the interests of its citizens through diplomacy and constructive engagement. In the first week that this petition has been open, it has received well over 5,500 signatures from across Canada, and the number of signatures is growing every hour. We encourage all Canadians who support peace and diplomacy to sign this petition, electronic petition 553, available on the website of the Parliament of Canada. The Iranian Canadian Congress has worked with the Member of Parliament Majid Jowhari on this formal request, and he has officially sponsored the petition. We would like to thank him for working with us and helping us through the process. And also we're grateful that he supports renewed relations between Canada and Iran. And now I would like to invite Mr. Jowhari to say a few words, and then we'll take any questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. Thank you very much for attending this conference, and thank you, Bijan, for your remarks. As our government has stated and consistently demonstrated, it will consult the communities and experts in all its policy-making processes. It has also stated that the process has to be evidence-based, open, transparent, secure, and inclusive. The government has provided various platforms and media for this consultation, from expert panels to focus group, town halls, electronic media such as e-petition. To that end, and through this petition, we are trying to gather evidence of what Iranians in Canada feel, what they have to say on those topics, and this petition provides a piece of evidence that would be hard to ignore. The result of this will be an indication of Iranian communities' will, and I believe it will serve as an asset in furthering the government's agenda. Our government's position is that Canada severing ties with Iran had no positive consequences for anyone, not for Canadians, not for the people of Iran, not for our Canadian allies, and not for global security. And an absence of diplomatic representation hurts the people of both countries. Our government has repeated its commitment to re-engage in a step-by-step manner. However, this strategy is a hard path that has chosen by the previous government. Our dialogue should contain all aspects of an engagement model, specifically consular services, trade, immigration, cultural, academic, sport, research, innovation, and tourism. A clear example of such model is of the Prime Minister's recent trip to China, where he was able to demonstrate his understanding of China's geopolitical position, including economical, environmental, social, cultural, research, and innovation roles. This approach allowed conversation regarding sensitive issues such as human rights to occur in a non-obtrusive way. This kind of engagement better supports an opportunity for progress on key priorities such as human rights. Canada, home to the second largest Iranian diaspora in the Western world, has a unique advantage in engaging with Iran. This diaspora, then, is a great untapped catalyst and resource in the process toward engagement. Other countries are already either directly engaging or benefiting from the power of this diaspora. Canada benefits in many ways from re-engagement with Iran. For example, a presence to promote Canadian principles and convictions, including respect for diversity and human rights. Furthermore, re-engagements supports our research and innovation sectors, fostering potential cooperation and opening markets to Canadian businesses, think tanks, and public policy institutions. An increase in university and student exchange opportunities will also bring diversity to Canadian culture and will be instrumental in promoting our country's values and fostering a better understanding between Persians and Canadians. In closing, I would like to acknowledge that there are different views toward Iran and the Iranian government. This method of using parliamentary petition is one step of ensuring those that want to speak up do in fact have a venue to do so in an open, transparent, and secured manner. In the future, I plan to work with my parliamentary colleagues to facilitate the establishment of other information gathering medium to present to the Government of Canada in an open, respectful, transparent, inclusive, and non-partisan manner. Once again, I thank you for participating in this press conference. Thank you. And now I believe we're going to take questions.
Well, Mr. Jowhari, it's your government, and they said that they will eventually open up the embassy, and they're still not doing it. So you must have reasons why it's still not done.
Well, there are a lot of common elements that both parties need to reach an agreement, and this is a process that will be taken step by step. And I have the confidence that our government is working very intelligently but cautiously to make sure that all aspects, as I mentioned, is considered before a final decision is made. Thank you.
So you don't think that it's too slow? Because I'm assuming that they think it's too slow. You don't think it's going too slow?
I believe that this is a complex process, and I believe that the government is working very diligently to make sure that all necessary steps are taken when the opportunity presents itself, to make sure that we come to a comprehensive and lasting solution.
Don't you have concerns about re-engaging with Iran? I mean, a country that has jailed Homa Hudfar, no one can see her, she's sick, jailed for her feminist views. Why do you want to re-engage?
I have to acknowledge that this is a matter of privacy, and this is an open case that our government is working hard to address, and we are very concerned about the health and well-being and continued detention of Dr. Hudfar, and our government is working very close with its allies to make sure that we will secure a release, a safe release as soon as possible.
Why do you want to re-engage with a country that treats
Because the lack of diplomatic, thank you for the question, because the lack of diplomatic relationship has not helped. It actually has hindered this process. When you're not at the table and when you're not having a open and constructive dialogue, you have to go through other channels, and that in itself is challenging.
How did having diplomatic relations with Iran help Zahra Kazemi in 2003? She was imprisoned, raped, and tortured.
I believe still an open dialogue would allow us to be able to engage and talk about all aspects. And I believe this is a different government, and we would like to take a different approach in how we would reach it.
If I may add just a point before you ask a question. On the issue of human rights, what we want to emphasize on is that the lack of relations between the two countries, the closure of the embassies, it hasn't resulted in any improvements in the condition of human rights in Iran. In fact, it has caused our government not to be able to advocate for the release and to make sure about the safety and the health condition of Canadian citizens or permanent residents who are visiting Iran. You mentioned the case of Ms. Zahra Kazemi. That is an important case that still needs to be followed up on, and it can be part of the dialogue between the Canadian government and Iranian government to ensure that those who committed that crime will actually be brought to justice. But there has to be a dialogue between the two countries so that Canada can actually advocate and protect the interests of its citizens. And by not being present, by not having any dialogue, it will not help the people of Iran in terms of human rights, and it definitely hampers the ability of our government to protect the safety of its citizens and to provide any basic consular services that they can provide.
So in the case of Madame Hudfar, what would be different if there was an embassy open?
So we hope that if Canada establishes diplomatic relations with Iran, they can have direct dialogue. One problem that today Canada faces is that because there is no dialogue between the two countries, Canada has to rely on other countries, in this case Italy, to do the communication for us. This is not a good policy. Canada, for protecting the interests of its citizens, needs to directly talk to the Iranian authorities and have a dialogue about the case of Professor Hudfar, about the case of Saeed Malikpour, who has been in prison for 8 years, and then also to talk to them about other disagreements that Canada has with Iran, about other policies of the Iranian government.
You believe that having a Canadian spokesperson would be more efficient than having an Italian spokesperson?
That is something that definitely does not guarantee that if Canada has diplomatic relations with Iran, it will result into Professor Hudfar's release. I don't think anyone, especially in our position, can provide that kind of guarantee. What is important is there has to be the usual way in dealing with these cases, is that the governments talk to each other and as a Canadian citizen, Professor Hoodfar has the right for her government to be the main ones, the main point of contacts to advocate for her rights and to ensure about her safety.
Can I just make a comment?
Can you
Sure.
just,
Sorry. Yeah, in the question that you just asked about Illy, is that we can only ask our allies to take this matter to a certain extent. At the end of the day, they have to make sure that they maintain their relationship and they be able to operate in that in the current environment. There are methods and there are points that our government could be able to bring up and table more openly if they're at the table and they're having a discussion. When they're sitting at table, that other friends will not or may not be able to.
What do you have? Like
Being
threats?
forceful might be an example of it. Being a bit more forceful in their position might be an example of it.
are you just backing this petition? Are you backing it or just bringing attention to it?
I am supporting the cause and I'm bringing attention to it.
Okay, so is it, just a further question that was asked a little earlier, do you want to stand closer to the mic there? The microphone?
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
So do you know if anything's happening on this? Is the government near to having diplomatic relations with Iran?
It's a matter of privacy. This is an open case. Our government is actively working on that. It is. I cannot comment on the case that's open, and I can assure you.
Is the government near to having any kind of diplomatic relations? Is this dossier moving along, or is it just being talked about, like, you know, with nothing concrete?
Yes. All I can tell you is that our government is committed, and given every opportunity it's taking to make sure that they further the dialogue and make sure that the priorities of the government is being discussed. And the case of Dr. Hoodfar is one of those.
Okay, but I'm talking about diplomatic relations. Has any government official spoken to any Iranian official about reopening the embassy or anything concrete, not just about Homa Hoodfar, just getting relations going again?
I can only comment on the information that's made available. As you know, there's been 2 rounds of discussion, and that's the extent that I'm going to comment on it today.
But isn't there an urgency? If it's all about getting relations going to get this woman out of prison, don't you have to get on it?
Yes, and our government is working actively on that.
I'm wondering, I guess the Iran government does not have an embassy in Canada either because it was closed. I'm just wondering, could the reopening of an Iranian embassy in Canada be kind of an exchange tool to negotiate in the case of Madame Hoodfar? Is that something that has some weight in the picture?
I can tell you that all options are being considered right now. And as this is an open case, that's the extent that I'm going to make a comment today.
What about you, sir?
We do not want to define the terms of an agreement. We have very capable diplomats in Global Affairs Canada, and we're confident that they will be able to do the negotiations on behalf of the Canadian people, the best negotiations, the best terms that are in the interest of Canadians. What we want to focus on today is that the lack of diplomatic relations and the closure of embassy have created troubles for the Iranian Canadian community here because of lack of access to consular services they need, and also for Canadians who visit Iran, it has created troubles for them because they cannot access any consular services when they go to visit that country and emergencies happen for them.
I guess what I'm trying to assess is whether or not the Iranian government finds it a hurdle not to have an embassy in Canada, and whether or not we can use that as a negotiation element.
Mm-hmm. There are different factions. What we know and what is sort of a public knowledge kind of is that there are different factions in Iran and different perspectives in Iran about re-engaging with the rest of the world. Unfortunately, I don't have more information to be able to provide more comments on this, but re-engagement, we believe what we want to emphasize on is that it will help our government to further its interest in the Middle East and will be able to solve the problems that have been created by the closure of the embassies for for the Iranian Canadian community here.
I mean, one of the things, listening to, both of you speaking so far here today, and what we've heard from the government in the past, it sounds a fair bit like there are some kind of, you have policies in mind that you are, you're discussing. It sounds like you almost have yardsticks in mind for what you're looking, maybe for Iran to meet before you actually look at concretely opening up an embassy or re-engaging certain steps of the diplomatic relationship there. If that doesn't happen, though, obviously, as you were saying, there are many different factions right now in Iran. Is the government prepared to let the status quo and not having a diplomatic relationship go on indefinitely if it doesn't see the progress that it wants to see?
I'll make a comment and then I think the question is more directed to Majid, so he will comment more on that, Mr. Jowhari. The reason that we've started this petition, we know that the government, Prime Minister Trudeau, Minister Dion, before the last federal election and after, they have, in several occasions, they have expressed the intention of the government to re-engage with Iran and re-establish diplomatic relations. A year has almost passed from the last federal election. We haven't seen much progress on the file, and the comments that we've heard from global affairs officials and also from Minister Dion is that there is no specific timeline about the embassy or reestablishing relations. That's why we want to, with this petition, we want to make it a priority and ask the government, basically the request is we're asking the government to prioritize this issue of reestablishing relations because of all the reasons that we've mentioned in our petition and also in our remarks today. Now I'll add.
Actually, great question. What I'd like to say is that in politics and in general negotiation, there are times that you take 3 steps forward and 5 steps back. And publicizing where you are in the process is not going to help the process itself. So yes, we've committed to a step-by-step engagement, and we'll continue on that path. And I can give you assurance that our government is very committed and is doing everything in its power to make sure that these steps are taken and taken in an expeditious manner without jeopardizing the guiding principles that we have put in place.
Now, are these, when you refer to steps here, are these concrete, actual, step 1 is X, step 2 is B, you've shared with Iran, so look, we want to engage with you, but unless you can do this and this and this, that's not going to happen.
These are questions that would be best answered by the Foreign Affairs, and I would decline to be able to answer that question at this point.
You said all options are out there. What options?
Options of, again, bringing, as I said, all the other dimensions into the discussion and exploring various ways that they can come to a common understanding as far as how they can move forward. These guiding principles needs to be agreed on, and they need to. These are the framework that they're trying to put in place need to be agreed on and move forward.
So there's discussions underway right now about a framework about how this could all happen. Is that what you mean?
One would assume yes. That's usually how it goes.
You don't know for sure, though.
I'm not in a position to make any comment on that one.
So is this just a half-baked idea, or is it going to happen?
Our government is very committed to make sure that this happens.
But no timeline.
As I said, in the process, I believe there are times that you take 3 steps forward and 5 steps back. Therefore, that making a timeline very difficult. This is a very sensitive situation. We've severed relations for the past 4 years. There's been no diplomatic relationship, and there is no dialogue for the past 4 years. A lot of things has changed, including our government and the position of our government, and these things take time.
But you have to admit, the Homa Hudfar case puts an urgency to it, no?
Absolutely, as many other cases.
You mentioned one other. Are there others we don't know about? Or?
We talked about one other case, and also the opportunity that we as Canadians are losing in being able to engage in other dimensions to hopefully facilitate, as I call the breaking of the ice, and being able to open a dialogue in other fronts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to make sure that you're right here.